America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I'm back. So great to have you with me. After 10 days in Spain and transiting through the United Kingdom, I can tell you I'm full of BBC News. And if you're not transfixed by what's going on in the United Kingdom, you ought to be. And you will be if you listen to the show for the next 10 weeks, because up till 12/12, that's what I'm talking about. Not 10 weeks, 6 weeks. I'm joined by Matthew Elliott. He was one of the key figures in the Leave campaign. He runs as editor-at-large BrexitCentral.com, and he joins me this morning from the United Kingdom. Hello, Matthew. Welcome back.
Good morning, Hugh.
Let's begin with an overlay. I just had on Nikki Wolf, editor of the New Statesman America. For a perspective from the left, you and I probably agree on most things political. How do you see us as we come up to the starting gate of the mad dash for 12/12?
Well, of course, the election itself will start formally basically on Tuesday when Parliament rises. Today, they're electing the Speaker for the next Parliament. And I must say, since the election was formally called in this informal part of the campaign, a number of things have happened. You know, the Conservatives have clearly got a great campaign machine, but actually the Labour Party have done pretty well in terms of pulling together their campaign. And some people have said that it would basically break apart right away, but it doesn't seem to have done so yet. Then we're seeing another interesting development in the sense of a Remain alliance developing. This is where candidates from the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, and Plaid Cymru, the Welsh Nationalist Party, are agreeing to step down in different seats to give the Remain side a better chance of getting in. And then, of course, there was the explosive interview, finally, that Donald Trump gave Nigel Farage last week on one of the UK radio stations, which has really dominated the first few days of the debate, really questioning, how good is Boris's deal? Is it Brexit in name only, Brino, as Nigel Farage likes to think, or is it a proper deal with which we should embrace, which I think. So that's been a big part of the first few days.
I think it's a proper deal that you should embrace as well. I want to ask you about Nigel Farage. He has a lot of admirers among my friends, including Dr. Arnott, Hillsdale College, and a number of people I know like him quite a lot. But I look at this and I say to myself, this is not a serious man. He's not standing. And what does it mean that he is not standing?
Well, when he announced yesterday on one of the Sunday talk shows that he wasn't going to stand as a candidate, Twitter really lit up, and you could see how lots of his supporters for the Brexit Party felt really let down. If your leader isn't bothering to stand in any seat, what does that say about the chance that he feels the party has in the election? So they felt let down. They felt he was slightly going through the motions. They felt like he was somebody who perhaps can't see the big picture. Finally, what he's been campaigning on for 25 years is about to happen, Brexit. And he's not there in the final part. He's not embracing the final bit. So they felt let down by it.
Now, Matthew, I've said about Adam Schiff that the way to understand Adam Schiff is he does whatever gets him on TV because he wants to succeed Dianne Feinstein in the Senate. So if he has to run a sham show trial impeachment, he'll do that. If he has to pretend that Robert Mueller had the goods, he'll do that. He'll say anything. He'll do anything to be on TV. And now I'm beginning to think that that's Nigel Farage.
It does seem like that because the only way he'll get to take part in TV debates and get TV time in this election is to put up the 600 candidates across the country. Just to briefly explain, the broadcasting rules in the UK, we don't have paid-for TV adverts like in the US. So the earned media on TV is much more important. And the broadcasters basically give roughly equal amounts of time to all of the parties, depending on how well they did in recent elections. So in order for Nigel Farage to get TV time, he has to put up all of these candidates. But of course, it's a big disappointment because what it could mean is that if the Brexit Party stands right across the country, that reduces Boris Johnson's chances and increases the likelihood of a hung parliament. And that's the last thing we need if we want to get rid of this Brexit paralysis.
Now, I just got done telling Nikki Wolf, and I'm afraid of confirmation bias, so I'm going to test it with you. My theory of the central issue in this election from far away is that most of Great Britain is sick to death of Philip Hammond and Speaker Bercow and what they represent, which is an elitist, out-of-touch aristocracy that is both on the left and the right and genuinely is out of touch with people, both left and right, and that this will be a great reaction against that. Am I close to the truth?
You're very close to the truth, and really, Brexit can be seen in through the prism of a reaction against the establishment. There's a lot of pent-up anger from really from the beginning of the 2000s, but primarily after the financial crisis, where people sort of gritted their teeth and were willing to allow the government to bail out the banks and to bring in austerity measures. But then when their standard of living didn't really rise in the subsequent 10 years, people have felt increasingly let down. And then when you have politicians, like you say, like the former Chancellor Philip Hammond or the former Speaker John Bercow, who really seem to be out of touch and elitist and not understanding what the people had said in 2016 about Brexit, those frustrations started to spill over. And that will be a big force in the election. But equally, on the other side, it must be said, there are people who feel very strongly on the Remain side. But interestingly, they tend to be perhaps these sort of upper middle classes. And it's really the lower middle classes and the working classes, more broadly, who are more on the Leave side. And that's where I think a lot of momentum from the election will come.
And I think the key distinction for me is establishment versus elite. I think we're going to have a very anti-establishment vote, but not an anti-elite. They're not going to hold it against Boris that he's Oxbridge. I think he's authentically bizarre. I think he's one of the most interesting people I've ever seen in politics, much like Donald Trump, and that in that authenticity, there is great strength. And he's such a better candidate than Theresa May that doesn't matter anymore how personally magnetic the leader is.
I think it does. I think it makes a big difference in the campaign. And you're absolutely right to make that distinction. Boris is one of these people who knows that the British people want the system to be shaken up. And I must say, his first 100 days as Prime Minister, which we recently passed, he has done much more than any other Prime Minister in those first 100 days. And he was dealing with Brexit at the same time. But if you look at the domestic policy agenda, in the sense of he's committed to an extra 20,000 policemen, huge extra funding for the NHS, increasing the living wage, a whole host of other things he's done in those first 100 days. People are broadly happy with him, and his popularity ratings are going up. So I think that will be reflected in the election.
Now, last question. After the break, I'm going to play a BBC bit that I heard yesterday about how Labour-owned online earned online attention in the last go-round with Theresa May, that they just had many memes, they had people working independent of the party, and that Theresa May got caught flat-footed, wrong-footed, whatever you call it over there, and that Jeremy Corbyn's people were on it. Is that still the situation? Because Theresa May was actually being advised by Obama people as opposed to genuine conservatives. Has that changed this time?
It has changed. There's an entirely new team at, it's called CCHQ, Conservative Central Headquarters, who are driving this election. And the social media output is much better than it was back in 2017, getting a lot more traction. I must say there's still a bit of a problem with the number of shares and retweets and that sort of thing. I think people do tend to be slightly more shy if they're on the Conservative side in the UK. But that said, Jeremy Corbyn isn't the candidate he was back in 2017, where there was almost like a cult-like personality around him, and people were chanting his name at Glastonbury, at a pop festival in the UK. He is tarnished somewhat now, so we might actually see a more equal playing field when it comes to, like you say, the earned shares and likes and retweets and that sort of thing come this election.
I saw a cheeky... As I saw yesterday, they called him a cheeky 15-year-old, got Jeremy Corbyn to sign the picture of him calling himself a communist and an anti-Semite. Did the anti-Semite thing still matter among UK voters, or have they absolved Jeremy Corbyn for the deep anti-Semitism that's in his party?
Oh, it does matter very, very much. And you only need to look at not only the Jewish media, who have come out very heavily against Jeremy Corbyn and saying that voters should support the best placed party to beat Labour candidates in their seats. But also people forget when you say, oh, it might just affect the Jewish community and the Jewish voters. Actually, a huge proportion of the country, a vast majority of the country are hugely outraged by some of the things that Corbyn has said and people he's associated with in the past on this issue. So I think one of the big drivers shown that he's unfit to be Prime Minister is his anti-Semitism.
Matthew Elliott, you've agreed to join me a couple of times a week between now and 12:12. I greatly appreciate it. Go to BrexitCentral.com and follow Matthew on Twitter at Matthew_Elliott.